Center Virtualization panel. Today, we are lucky enough to have been joined by 4 industry representatives from VMware, Mal, Asif, Will, and Kalani. They will be running this seminar tonight, showcasing their range of technical certifications, just how accessible they are, and giving a detailed overview of their Data Center Virtualization course. Before we get any further, on behalf of the UTS Tech Society, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands our city campus now stands. And I'd like to extend this acknowledgement to the people and nations upon whose lands you are zooming in from today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge from these places. Now, before we begin, some quick housekeeping rules. We would greatly appreciate it if everyone could please keep your webcams and mics off throughout tonight's event to minimize interruptions. If you do have a question throughout tonight's seminar that you want to ask, these will all be answered during the Q&A segment towards the end. So make sure you type them in the chat so we can read them at the end of the session. Before we hand over to our industry guests, VMware is a company who specializes in cloud computing and virtualization. They provide a number of technical certifications and courses on their platform, which once completed can be used in your resume. They range in expertise and difficulty and will provide you with the certification according to what you have applied for, giving you some accreditation in the industry. This is quite useful because it is very hard to attain accreditation or experience without requiring a job. Now, without further ado, I'd like to kick off tonight's seminar by passing over to our industry guest from VMware.
Thanks, Gemma. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully this will all work and we can get started. All right, so thanks so much for inviting us along today. Hopefully you guys can share my screen. I can see Kalani, maybe if you could nod, Kalani, that you can see my screen. Thank you. All right. Yeah, so thanks to the University of Technology, Sydney. We're delighted to be here. So today we've got 4 speakers pretty much, including the Q&A. And so I run VMware Learning for Australia and New Zealand, sales and delivery. We've got Will Smith, who joined our grad program this year, and he's going to tell us a bit about that experience. We've got Asif Rafiq, who is our staff technical instructor, and he teaches a broad range of courses and has been doing that with VMware for about 14 years. And we've got Kalani Dantanarayana, who is our university recruiter for ANZ, who's been key in setting this up. So we think we're going to run through until 7:30. And so what we plan to try and do is move pretty quickly through a VMware overview, a bit of an update from Will on the grad experience. I'll talk a little bit about the certification program, and then we're going to ask Asif to delve into one of our courses, into a few modules that's about the core technology behind the whole organization of VMware. And then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So we're going to work pretty hard to try and stick to that schedule. Before we start, I'd just like to play just maybe the first minute of a short video, just to give you a bit of an idea about what it's like being at VMware. I just need to turn on the share computer sound. Just let me do that.
At VMware, we...
If I don't turn on share computer sound, you won't hear it. So there we go.
We heard it earlier, Mel. Just...
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
That's good. All right.
At VMware, we believe technology has the power to change the world for the better, that innovation can be a force for good, and that our people are at the heart of this transformation. Work here, and you're part of a diverse, global community of passionate people working together in a culture of possibility. Part of a family of people who care about how you work, live, and play. And where your ideas are transformed into positive impact for our customers and our communities. Work here and your differences are celebrated, talents are amplified on the job, in the community, and around the world.
其实，在 VMware 工作是非常有挑战性的，因为你会发现有很多东西要学。
I feel supported by the people because everyone is motivating each other. Everyone runs off each other's energy, and I really appreciate coming to work every day.
At VMware, we're committed to doing business in a net.
So a bit of an idea about what some of the people think
At VMware,
about working at VMware. And I've been at VMware for about 3 years, and I've been working in the IT industry for about 30 years. And I wanted to join an organization which was part of, Silicon Valley type organization, and also join an organization where I really enjoyed the culture, and VMware's been like that for me. So what is VMware? Well, it's a US-based company. It turns over more than $10.8 billion per year, and it's got about 30,000 employees in the company, and over 500,000 customers that are typically enterprise, which means big companies, and also government, and headquartered in Palo Alto, California. So from VMware's point of view, it's a software company, and VMware believes that software's got the power to unlock new opportunities for people and our planet. And so it's all about creating fantastic software that drives the digital foundation for the future technologies that our customer organizations are trying to build. And that's organizations that are building digital services for students, or for customers, or for patients, or for citizens. And so we're building an automated infrastructure that can deliver all of that. We're a leader in enterprise software, a lead innovator in enterprise software worldwide, and operating across a whole bunch of different areas that you can see listed there. And we'll try and go into a little bit more detail in terms of what that looks like. So VMware's been around for about 20 years. It started in 1998. It came out of university in the US. I think it was Stanford, and was founded by Diane Green and a couple of others. And originally what they did is they took a mainframe technology called virtualization and brought it down to the microcomputer world into a PC. That was the first product. And then the big things that after that was ESXi, which was the server version of that. And Asif's going to explain exactly what all of that is, but it's an incredible technology that's been the foundation of VMware ever since. In 2004, EMC Corporation acquired VMware. 2007, it went public. 2012, it extended into network virtualization with the acquisition of Nicira. So then you had server virtualization, network virtualization, and then extended out into mobile device management with AirWatch. So eventually, VMware became an enterprise software organization with all of these offerings, and also in 2018 achieved carbon neutrality. So that means that we're net zero in terms of the amount of carbon generated by the organization and how much the organization saves. And in fact, VMware technology saves energy for our customers, because the server virtualization technology in effect means you can run sort of 10 software servers on one hardware server. And I've seen some calculations where, for example, VMware has saved enough energy where you could power the country of Denmark for a whole year. Some exciting stories there. And then following that is acquisition of Carbon Black, which is all about security, and Pivotal, which is all about software development. In terms of partnerships across the world, in terms of IT, VMware's got significant alliances with major partners. You can see in terms of the hyperscalers in the cloud world, AWS, Google, Azure, and then, you know, it might not be as obvious, but IBM, Oracle, and Alibaba Cloud are huge cloud players as well in the digital workspace in terms of device management, partnered up in terms of being able to manage and support customers who've got huge fleets of Apple and Microsoft devices. And then right across the telco space as well, with software-defined wide area networking and gateways into major global carriers. So VMware's objectives are to have the software technology that helps IT in our customer organizations build the digital foundation for the future for the IT they need for their customers and employees. We're also all about building in software so that the technology can be automated, and that means that infrastructure can be deployed very quickly to try and meet the needs of very agile organizations who are trying to build very fast and also iterate, you know, new versions very quickly to market. And then because of the risks that our customers face, we've got to be able to have intrinsic security inside all of our solutions to be able to manage the risk of attacks by all sorts of different actors. So we're delivering this foundation across any cloud. So our vision is any device, any application, any cloud. So our customers can use our technology to manage virtual workloads across any cloud. They can deliver any application using our container or virtual machine technology, and then deliver that securely and in a compliant way to any device. And that could be a phone or a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, but it could be all these other different things as well, health devices, vehicles that have got computer capability and that type of thing, or the world of Internet of Things, as they call it. So our product portfolio is mainly in sort of 5 areas. Application modernization, which is all about containers, container orchestration, Kubernetes. Multi-cloud, which is all about data centers, hybrid cloud, being able to move workloads back and forth between public cloud like AWS and a private data center and being able to manage all that. Digital workspace, which is all about device management, phones, tablets, laptops, and then also being able to deliver applications into that environment, and then also virtualize it so you can have virtual desktops running in the cloud. Intrinsic security across the whole thing, endpoint security, but also security in the data center, and then managing the networking in a secure way of all of that in a software-defined way. Instead of having hardware switches and routers in data centers, all of that is virtualized into software, which gives you incredibly granular management of the networking environment. We have an award-winning ecosystem of partners. So it's not just VMware with its 30,000 people, but also we've got resellers and integrators all over the world, 20,000 partner resellers, 4,000 service providers all offering virtual VMware infrastructure, and 1,000 technology partners. So it's a massive ecosystem of partners using VMware's technology. And then, as I mentioned before, across the 500,000 customers or so, if you look into Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000, then practically all of those customers are using some sort of VMware technology in their organizations. Importantly, VMware is also, as I mentioned, my own experience, rated as a great place to work by some of these surveys, including comments about diversity, and I experience in VMware its drive to be a leader in diversity and inclusion. Best employer for women on the right there from Forbes 2020. Also on the left there is comments in relation to LGBTQ equality. And I see that in an organization from our senior leaders owning and driving our company to improve in these particular areas. And so certainly inclusion, we have sort of pods in our organization where our leaders and members of the team are meeting to drive initiatives in these areas. And one area that we're proud of is being able to welcome grads into our organization. And so what we wanted to do was to invite Will Smith to tell you a little bit about his experience as a grad at VMware. And to do that, I'm going to stop sharing and invite Will to share.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mel. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Yep.
Beautiful. All righty. Well, I just wanted to take 5 minutes, I guess today, to tell you a bit about the experience though so far. So I joined in February, earlier this year as a grad, and Mal is obviously my boss. Kalani was my recruiter, and both of them are awesome. And yeah, I guess a little bit of the story so far from my side of things. I went to Northeastern University over in Boston in the USA. I moved over there in 2016 on a rowing scholarship, which I was super fortunate to do. And before that, I think why I'm pointing that out is I'd never actually been exposed to tech before that. I did not have a technical background. I think my favorite subjects in high school were literature and English. So about as far away as you could get from that side of things. And so my first, and on the right here, we have sort of experience. And my first internship was with a PR agency called V2 Communications. And a small kind of agency in Boston, and they specialize in tech companies. So that's where I really got introduced into tech and this whole world of enterprise software. And much to my surprise, and pretty much everyone who knows me, I absolutely loved it. And yeah, it was super fantastic. And this challenge of trying to communicate what it is that these tech kind of big giants do and why it provides value and how to make, I think one of the ones I always remember is UiPath, which does robotic process automation. And if you ask me what that is right now, I probably couldn't tell you. But the point there being, it's how do you try and make that sexy? How do you try and make that appealing and fun to communicate and compelling? So that was where I got my start in tech, and I absolutely loved it. So the next thing I pursued pretty doggedly was moving over to Silicon Valley to get an internship over in California. And actually, I think Kalani and Mal may or may not know this, but I did actually interview for VMware when that was going on back in 2018 or 19, and did not get it. So second time around, I was lucky. But yeah, so I got the opportunity at ServiceNow, which is, another awesome company out there. And while I was out there, the VMware was, and I'm sure ServiceNow, this is probably an internal meeting, but VMware was one of the list of companies on the board that ServiceNow was trying to scale up and become. And I think that's what's so cool about a company like VMware, is that it's still so young. I mean, I think on that chart Mal showed, 1998 was when it kind of first about. I mean, that's younger than me. And yet it's grown to this, I think it's $12 billion last year in terms of annual revenue. And it kind of is that blueprint of Silicon Valley startup that grows into a huge organization that's just everywhere. So that's kind of the journey from my side of things. But the question is, why? Why did I join VMware? Why did I pick VMware out of a bunch of other tech companies? And I think what I would break that down into is kind of three key distinct areas. So for me, like the personal development, I mean, I'm sure you technical people probably see development and think of coding. But for me, I was thinking more about personal development and the opportunities there. And I think it may have been Gemma or Rupali or one of you mentioned before about buddying and mentorship and that being really important in your internship. And I think what's been really, really cool so far in my first 6 months is just the focus that there has been on this push for, aligning you with a buddy, aligning you with mentors within the business. It might be within your part of the organization or, encourage it to go outside of your part of the organization. And it's been really, really fantastic. And I think it just completely fast tracks your development. So I would say in 6 months now, I'm a lot more ahead of where I thought I would be purely because of that. And I think if I could provide a bit of unsolicited advice on that front, when you all do become graduates or that company, you do have this grad card and you can pretty much approach anyone and say, hey, I'm new, I want to learn. And VMware, what I would say, moving on to the second point in terms of people and culture, it's a really fantastic organization. And Mal mentioned the leaders before being super, super big on D&I and the push for inclusivity and all that stuff. And they're really open and willing to listen, and will always be ready to have a chat. And I think I've really found that important. And I suppose lastly, the tech is why someone joins a tech company. I think is a big factor of it. And it's really, really cool. And I'm understanding more and more, talking to customers about how they're using it, how they're driving value out of it. And I think what's really interesting is that it's something that, I think server virtualization, we see as the industry is moving generally towards cloud and everything. But some of the conversations I'm having with customers at the moment are about how they've moved completely into the cloud, but now they're kind of being run dry by AWS and Azure and all these big hyperscalers, and they're actually looking at bringing stuff back on premise in terms of server virtualization. So it's one of those things that I think we'll see a big kind of boomerang or the hybrid kind of multi idea is what Mal talked about earlier. That's just going to be huge. So on all kind of three areas of that, that's sort of what made my decision. And I guess a few photos there to provide. Much of the 6 months has been in lockdown, so there hasn't been as much interaction as all of us would have liked. But on the right here is a nice view from the Melbourne office. So I know you guys are all in Sydney, but maybe you can make a trip down to the better state at some point. And there's a lovely little games table. We've got a ping pong. That's Carlos, who's a member of our education team. And here's the grads, and obviously my little home office set up there. And I think one thing as well I wanted to just touch on is, I think there's a lot to be said about, or a lot is said about company values. And I think it's especially funny when you're interviewing for different companies and you're looking at different companies and you look at sort of websites and their values, and there's a big trend of just everyone says a lot of good things about what they do. And I think it's a bit of a meme in and of itself. And if any of you watch the HBO show Silicon Valley, you'll know it's a meme where every tech company is making the world a better place. But I think what this means to me and what I've genuinely found at VMware is that in my kind of small way, or my kind of small scope of influence and what I've been able to do, I genuinely do believe that. And it's been really cool. So this obviously is the Epic 2 values, which we kind of align to execution, passion, integrity, customers, and community. And how that kind of comes into play is that we have epic days off every now and again, that you just get a day off, a paid day off for free to kind of focus on your mental well-being and take some time off. And there's an epic shutdown at the end of the year, which I know we're all excited for. And I think the other part of it is the service learning aspect, or the VMware Foundation. So, and a quick story for you. When we went there was a trip up to Sydney to bring all the kind of the grads together back in May. And there was a big focus on one of those days. I think we were in the office for 3 days, and for a whole half day, we kind of devoted to, and this is a push from the leadership down, to kind of focus on some service learning. So we put together some hygiene and kind of food packages to be kind of distributed around Sydney to rough sleepers. So we sort of broke up into little groups and had a little walk around and, distributed these packages and tried to make a difference in our own small way. And I think as a company, there's elements of that just happen all the time. And you're really empowered to do that, which is awesome. And yeah, I was going to say, if anyone had any quick questions to fire away before we jump into the technical side of things, happy to have them. But also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and engage in any questions you have about the graduate program or, graduate experience in tech in general, and we'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, we might follow the house rules and go to the Q&A at the end, Will.
Oh, yep.
But I can see they're coming in the chat, so we can have a bit of a read through them, and we'll pick up the questions at the end. But Will, thank you so much for that. And fantastic to hear that experience, from your point of view. That was the wrong thing to click. So let me just jump back to just a quick overview of certifications. And hopefully you can see my screen again. I can see you, Will. Can you nod if you can see my screen? Lovely, thank you. All right, so except for Kalani, the rest of us work for VMware Learning. And so we're a business unit in VMware and VMware Learning Services. So, we train about 180,000 students a year all over the world. We probably train about 2,000 in Australia and New Zealand. And there's about 250,000 VMware certified individuals. And so IT professionals typically certified in VMware. We've got pretty good rating in terms of the quality of the training, which could be classroom training or it could be online self-paced training, so we get pretty good satisfaction reports. In terms of the different professional levels of our certification, the bottom one is the entry point, which is VMware Certified Technical Associate. And then the next one is Certified Professional. And that's a deep practitioner certification. So it involves at least one training class, which is a 5-day class, recommended a second one. And then it also involves some experience and hands-on with VMware's technology to get through the exam, because not all of the answers to the questions are in the course. So it's testing experience and competency to give that certified professional certification. And then above that, there's advanced professional and certified design expert. And the area that we're going to be talking about today is in certified technical associate, which is really the starting point. We have certification tracks across all of the technology areas that we've talked a little bit about in terms of where VMware operates. And so in each of these areas, there's those levels where you've got VCTA, VCP, VCAP, and VCDX. So this is cloud management and automation. Then also we've got a security track, starting off with VCTA Sec. I guess I'm running through these just to show you that there's multiple pathways that an undergraduate or someone becoming a professional can approach training with VMware's technology. There's VCTA in network virtualization, and then also the professional levels in digital workspace as well, in application modernization, and then also in the original core technology, which is data center virtualization. And so the VCTA DCV is a great starting point to start to learn about VMware. And to achieve VCTA DCV, there is a cost associated with this. So there's a cost to access the content, and there's also a cost for the exam. And it's the same with the rest of the training. There are fees for the courses and fees for exams and that sort of thing. But to start with VCTA, the first step is to do a course which is online. Once again, there's a cost for that. It's called VMware Data Center Virtualization Core Technical Skills. And then once you've completed that course, you can then pay for an exam and try and sit the exam. If you pass the exam, you end up with the certification VMware Certified Technical Associate Data Center Virtualization. And today we've got Asif, who's going to take us through a couple of the modules from the online course. He's going to take us through it from an instructor-led point of view for the VMware Data Center Virtualization Core Technical Skills course. And so Asif, it's over to you.
Thanks, Mel. Right, let me see if I can share my screen. Right. Hi, Will, can you see my screen with the title, with a slide called Introduction to Virtual Machines?
I can, yep.
Okay, thanks. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Asif Rafiq. Well, I should not miss this opportunity. Hey, I wanted you guys to see that I am wearing a VMware Learning hoodie. Well, I just wanted to make sure that the world can see me wearing this. Okay, ever since we have received it, we didn't have an in-person course delivered. Right, guys. Well, my name is Asif Rafiq. I work for VMware. I'm a bit of an old-timer at VMware. This is my 15th year with the company. My objective here is really to give you guys a very high-level overview of the technology which VMware produced, developed, and changed the IT world. Right, that is virtual machines, the virtualization platform on x86 boxes. Okay, virtualization, as Mal did mention, was not a new concept. It has been around in the mainframes for many, many years, but VMware developed or invented the virtualization platform for x86 virtual machines. Right, introduction to virtual machines, that's what I'm going to go through. We'll keep it as brief as possible. As Mal did mention, there is the VCTA certification. This full course prepares you for that exam. So I'm only going to go through a couple of sections or modules from that particular course. Right, let me just maximize this. I'm going to stop the video so that we get the best quality. Right, introduction to virtual machines. Right, the objective here really is to describe a virtual machine, how virtual machines work, recognize the benefits of using virtual machines in a data center. Right, as we did mention, virtual machines are not new. Businesses have been using, when we say they're not new, they've been used in the mainframe environment for many, many years. But virtual machines on the x86 platform is what our hypervisor, that is ESXi server, what gives organizations the ability to host their solutions in there. Right, so let me just go through this. Okay, right, so traditional servers. I'm sure you guys are aware of desktop computers and laptops. Traditional servers really, a server is a piece of hardware, a computer, which provides all of the resources which are required to host services which we need to share across multiple users. A typical example, and I'm just talking to the slide here, a typical example is a web server or a website or a web portal. The web portal is accessed by hundreds of thousands of users over the internet or over internal network for that matter. Now, these traditional servers provide the resources which are required by the web portals which we host in there. And I've just used web portal as an example. There are other services, many services like databases, messaging systems, and so forth, which need to be accessed by multiple users. So these servers, these server computers traditionally have what have been used for many, many years to host those services, host those applications for that matter. These servers provide the processors, the hardware-based processors, CPUs as they are called, hardware-based memory, hardware-based networking resources as well, which can be consumed by those resources. Now, in a traditional server, the operating system is the one which owns all of or controls or manages all of the underlying hardware. The resources, the applications, if you want to call them, they run in the operating system itself. Now, the application of the solution which is running inside the traditional processor does not get to consume or use all of the resources which are provided by that hardware. Right, so that is where the curriculum developers came up with this example, a server or analogy. A server can be compared to a large bus with one seat and a passenger. Well, obviously the bus has got more space, more seats available, but the space is not being utilized, which really means when it comes moving from point A to point B, every user, every traveler which needs to get to point A to point B need to get a bus of its own, which really doesn't make sense, right? But in a traditional server, server-based data center before virtualization was introduced by VMware, that's what used to happen, right? So there used to be a box, if you want to call it, a computer which was hosting a particular solution like a web portal, a particular box which is hosting the messaging system or the databases, because the amount of resources which are required to provide access to multiple users to those resources had to be made available lot of times made available exclusively to one particular solution. Right, so virtual machine is a software representation of a physical computer. So the virtual machines, the virtual machine gives us the ability to host or run, if you want to call it, an operating system inside an isolated environment. Okay, the virtual machines are hosted on what was developed by and is made available by VMware on the hypervisors. The hypervisor is the one which owns all of the underlying resources. The virtual machine has got its own set of virtual resources. Okay, so the virtual machine has got a virtual CPU or a virtual processor. It has got its own virtual memory, own virtual network interface or a NIC. The operating systems, when they are installed inside the virtual machine, they do not see the virtual hardware to be any different from the physical hardware. The applications which run inside the operating system will work and run or do work and run in exactly the same way if they were hosted on a physical computer. Right, so what are the advantages of using a virtual machine instead of using a traditional server? On a physical computer, instead of installing the operating system, we install the hypervisor. The hypervisor is what abstracts all of the underlying hardware from the virtual machines. The hypervisor can host one or multiple virtual machines. So you can have multiple virtual machines running on the same physical server. Now, the consolidation ratio, that is the number of virtual machines which we can host, which we can place or host on a particular ESXi server, can run into tens or maybe even hundreds for that matter. In the virtual desktop infrastructure environment, for example, I know of clients who have got more than 150 desktops running on a single physical box. In a typical data center where you do have server-based resources running, it is not uncommon to have a consolidation ratio of around 30 virtual machines per ESXi host. And that is not a limitation of ESXi server. The current limitation, in fact, on the number of virtual machines which you can have on an ESXi server is more than 1,000. It is 1024, in fact, on the latest version. Now, every virtual machine which is hosted on the ESXi server is completely isolated. Hey, I really need to jump this. Right, so a virtual machine, how does a virtual machine work? A virtual machine is made up of, or it is encapsulated, if you want to call it, in a set of files. That is what it is. Okay, it gets, when you power it on, it gets hosted on the ESXi server. It is presented, the guest OS, which is running inside the virtual machine, is presented with its own set of virtual resources, virtual CPU, virtual memory, virtual NIC, and other virtual components as and when required. We can host multiple virtual machines on a single ESXi server. They are completely isolated from each other, which really means that you can run different solutions in each one of the virtual machines. And when I say those solutions can be based on different operating systems. So you can, for example, have a virtual machine which is running the Windows operating system. You can have a virtual machine running a Linux variant. You can have a virtual machine running Mac OS for that matter. So the underlying resources which are owned and managed by the hypervisor are going to be shared between those virtual machines. But those virtual machines are completely isolated from each other, right? So because the virtual machines are encapsulated in a set of files, that makes the virtual machines very, very portable. Okay, so if I want to move a virtual machine from Sydney to Melbourne, or from Melbourne to Perth for that matter, all I have to do is just port those files the virtual machine is made up of to the destination, and we can then go and register it, enroll it on an ESXi server, and you can power it on and start using it. Right. So the components of the virtual machine, as I did mention, the virtual machine is going to be hosted on an ESXi server. The ESXi server provides our VM kernel, which is the hypervisor. The virtual machine is presented with its own hardware. That is the virtual hardware, virtual CPU, virtual memory, virtual disk, virtual network, and so forth. The drivers are installed in the operating system as they are traditionally installed in a physical on a physical machine, for that matter. The operating system interacts or communicates with the underlying hardware, the virtual hardware in this case, using those drivers, and the applications are stacked on the top of the operating system. So if you want to look at the hardware, that is what would have been presented by a physical machine. So there's a virtual hardware which is presented to the virtual machine. Drivers provide communication mechanism between the guest OS, which is going to be installed inside the VM, whether it is Windows, Mac OS, or Linux, and the application is the solution which we are running in this. That application could be a web portal. This could be a messaging system, could be a database for that matter. Right, so I've already mentioned the virtual machines are completely isolated from each other, which really means that if something goes wrong with any one of the virtual machines, it does not impact on any other workload running or hosted on that particular ESXi server. They are encapsulated in a file, in a set of files, I should say. There are a number of files which a virtual machine will be made up of. That number of files, once again, will vary depending on the state of the machine as well. They are completely independent from the underlying hardware. So if we go and make any changes to the underlying hardware, for example, if we add a new storage subsystem, or we add another host, for example, in the cluster, we do not have to go and reconfigure the virtual machine at all, because the underlying hardware is completely abstracted from the virtual machine itself. And I did mention the term server consolidation. That really is going to help us, or has helped us, reducing the footprint of our data centers, our traditional data centers. Before organizations moved to virtualization, if they had 30 servers, they could achieve, they could make 30 virtual machines running on a single ESXi server, for that matter. Right, so each of the virtual machines is completely isolated, which means that we can lifecycle manage the applications, the operating systems in those virtual machines completely independently, for that matter. One of the key advantage of virtualization also is centralized management, right? So because the virtual machines are hosted on the ESXi server, we have got, well, I'm going to talk about the components. We have got an admin console, which is called a vSphere client. That vSphere client gives us the ability to centrally manage every virtual machine which is hosted on every ESXi server which we create in a data center. Okay, so we do not have to be like on a traditional server. We have to be physically contact we have to have a physical contact with the machine to perform any management tasks, applying patches, updates, and so forth. With the virtual machines, you can do it from the comfort of your workstation. Okay, so they're all centrally controlled. Now, because you can have multiple virtual machines hosted on our ESXi host, they share the resources. That scheduling of resources or the sharing of the resources is going to be handled by the hypervisor. So as in when, say, for example, there is an application which needs to perform a CPU task, that CPU task is passed on to the underlying hypervisor, which will then communicate with the physical hardware for that thread to be executed. Okay, well, I did mention virtual machines are encapsulated in files, a set of files. We which makes it very, very portable. Okay, we can move the virtual machines from one location to another by simply copying the files. The files not only include everything which is hosted inside the virtual machine, that is the operating system and the application, it also retains the state of the virtual machine to the files as well. vSphere, which is our virtualization platform, gives us the ability to actually live migrate virtual machine from one host to another. Okay, so that's a feature which we call vMotion. vMotion gives us the ability to migrate a virtual machine from one ESXi to another ESXi host with no downtime, which really means that all of the processes, the guest OSs and the applications and processes which are running inside the virtual machine will continue to run. Any remote user who were accessing or using those resources won't even know that the virtual machine has been moved from one ESXi server, that's from one hardware platform to another hardware platform for that matter. Okay, as I did mention that we can move virtual machine to any physical server, as long as the physical servers are consistently configured. Okay, the virtual machine, the processes running inside the virtual machines will continue to run without any changes for that matter, without any downtime for that matter. There may be some instances where you will have to power off the machine before we can migrate. Okay, for example, if you do have dissimilar computer hardware, then vMotion, that is the live migration of the virtual machine, is not supported. Now, a typical scenario is, I would like to presume that you guys are aware of the fact that there are two competing processor vendors. So there are Intel-based machines and there are AMD-based machines. When it comes to vMotion is not supported between dissimilar platforms. So if we do have dissimilar platforms, that does not mean that we cannot migrate the machines. We can migrate the machines, but we'll have to power off the guest OSs inside the virtual machine before we can do so. So there will be a short outage while the machine is being ported from one host to another. Right, server consolidation. Well, we need fewer physical servers in the data center, which of course reduce our maintenance costs, power, cooling, real estate as well. The physical footprint of the data center is reduced quite significantly for that matter. Right, so I mentioned the consolidation ratios. It is not uncommon for data centers, that is from the server virtualization perspective, to have 30 to 40 virtual machines per ESXi server. So if there are, say, 1,000 virtual machines which are required in a data center, previously we would have required close to 1,000 physical servers to host them. Now we can just simply host them in 1,000 divided by 30 servers. Okay, so that is like about just over 34 servers for that matter. Okay, so because the resources are shared between the virtual machines, we do get to use a very high percentage of resources. Typically in a virtualized environment, we will aim to use around 80% of resource utilization. Okay, let's just move on. Right, how virtualization works. Right, the purpose of the hypervisor, I briefly mentioned this, describe how VMs share resources in a virtualized environment. Okay, I'm not going to use this as an example any longer. I'd like to go straight there. Right. So, well, just recapping what we talked about, one physical server has the ability to host multiple virtual machines, hence multiple guest operating systems and solutions for that matter. Each operating system which is hosted, or the guest operating system which is inside the virtual machine, shares the resources on the physical server on which our hypervisor has been installed. So that is going to result in significant CapEx savings for that matter. We will have a reduction in operational expenses as well, as I did mention, because the number of computers which are going to be required, or number of servers which are going to be required, is going to come down quite significantly, quite dramatically for that matter. Okay, few servers, lower costs for the real estate, for cooling, power consumption, maintenance, and so forth for that matter. Right, let me just skip that. I'm using the same slides which are used in the... Right, so types of hypervisor. Two types of hypervisors are available. Okay, so there's type 1, type 2. Now, that takes me back to the early days of virtualization. Now, type 2 hypervisors, which are hosted hypervisors, that was what was first developed by VMware, in fact, right? So we still have, in fact, that product. It is called VMware Workstation. There was a VMware Workstation which was available for the Windows platform and for the Linux platform, right? And then subsequently, we did have one for Mac OS as well, right? As the name implies, hosted hypervisor type 2, they were hosted on the top of an operating system. So you installed VMware Workstation on either Windows or Linux. Initially, it was Windows and Linux. So we were basically limited by whatever the limitation of the hosting operating system was. And then, as I did mention, VMware Fusion was what was Mac OS based. Type 1, which is bare metal hypervisors, they became available in 2001. So that was the start of, in those days, in fact, it was called VI, Virtual Infrastructure VI Service. Now, the bare metal hypervisors, which now in the current format, in the current version, is ESXi. It started its life as ESX. ESXi is installed directly on the server hardware. So it's an operating system in its own right, if you want to call it. The hypervisor, when you do install, that is what owns the entire underlying, the underlying hardware. That includes the CPU, memory, storage, networking, all of those resources. And the virtual machines simply share those resources. The hypervisor is the one which is going to be responsible for scheduling access to those resources as and when required by the operating systems. Okay, so before you can create or run VMs, of course, you will need to first install the hypervisor, that is our ESXi server, on a physical machine. Okay, whichever method you want to use, you can mount an ISO, you can share it if you do wish to as well. The entire ESXi installation process can be automated as well. Most of the vendors today, in fact, IBM, HP, Hitachi, and so forth, they do supply pre-installed ESXi for that matter. So you will need to install the hypervisor on a physical server before you can start creating the virtual machines or hosting the virtual machines, if you want to call it. Right, so the hypervisor completely manages the underlying physical resources. Right, so you host or create the virtual machines on the ESXi servers by using one of the multiple tools available. You can use the vSphere client, which is a graphical user interface to create the virtual machines. The virtual machines get created or hosted or placed, whichever term you want to use, on the ESXi host. The virtual hardware is the one which is going to be created by the hypervisor and presented to every virtual machine which is being created on that particular ESXi server. The hypervisor manages the virtual hardware assigned to the virtual machine. That is, remember what is presented to the guest OS. So guest OS sees the virtual CPU, the virtual memory, the virtual hard drive, the virtual networking as if it was being installed on a physical machine. Okay, so each virtual machine will have its own set of resources, that is its own set of virtual CPU, virtual memory, virtual disk, and virtual network. The hypervisor is the one which is going to provide shared access to each one of the type of resource, that is the underlying types of resources. Right, so all of the underlying hypervisor, I didn't mention GPUs, but CPU, memory, networking, disks, and GPUs, they're all owned by the VM kernel, by the hypervisor. Right, so whenever the virtual machines need to consume any of the resources, here in this slide we talk about virtual CPU. So if there is a virtual CPU thread which needs to be executed, the virtual machine's guest OS is going to forward that request to the hypervisor. On the hypervisor, the associated driver is going to be spawned and the request is going to be forwarded to the underlying physical CPUs. Multiple virtual machines, because they have their own virtual CPU, they send their request to the virtual CPUs, which then get forwarded to the hypervisor. And in the hypervisor, there is the scheduling mechanism, which is going to make the CPU thread request to be executed on the physical cores, that is the physical cores which are owned and managed by the server itself. Now, the scheduling can be oversubscribed as well or overcommitted. Okay, so scheduler will take care of ensuring that any execution requests which have been made, they are serviced by the underlying physical CPUs. Virtual memory, the sum of the virtual memory can exceed, once again, memory can be overcommitted as well. Now, there are built-in memory reclamation techniques which are built into our hypervisor in the ESXi server. VM kernel is our hypervisor. The underlying memory, now let me just not talk to the slide here, just talk to the real thing. Let's say, let's presume that my physical host on which I have installed the ESXi server has got 8 gig of memory, that is physical memory. So I bought a box, I bought a CPU or a server which has got 8 gig of memory. I'm just using that as an example. In today's world, it's highly unlikely that you're buying a server with that lower value. It's just that in the slide, they have used lower numbers, so that's why I'm using that. So if your host has got 8 gig of memory, you can have virtual machines whose aggregate memory can be greater than the physical memory. So here in this screen shot here, we have got 3 virtual machines, one with 1 gig, the second one with 2 gig, and the third one with 8 gig. The underlying physical memory does not have to be 11 gig or greater. Okay, it could be 8 gig. Okay, the reason is the operating system, the likelihood of the operating system and the processes which are running inside those virtual machines to place a demand of their configured memory, 100% of their configured memory, is relatively low. In fact, typical servers, and this is Gartner's research of the last 40 odd years, a typical server very rarely uses more than 10 to 15% of its configured or available resources. So if there is a machine which has got 1 gig memory configured, the chances of it using anything more than about 100 or 150 meg are relatively low. We're talking about typical servers. Of course, there will be high-end apps like web portals, messaging systems, and databases, which most likely are going to have a higher memory and CPU utilization for that matter. But typical server is never going to place a demand equal to the configured resources. It's highly unlikely. But if it does happen, in the hypervisor, we do have memory reclamation techniques available as well, which are dynamic. They are going to automatically go and reclaim the memory if required, if it is not being used. And as I did mention, we do have the ability to migrate the virtual machines to other ESXi hosts. So if there is an ESXi host, which indeed goes into memory contention or is running out of a memory resource or CPU resource for that matter, we do have systems in place. We do have a feature called distributed resource scheduler. The distributed resource scheduler will migrate, that is live migrate or vMotion the machines from one host to another. That is a host which has gone into contention to the hosts which have got more resources available. And it's all dynamic and totally transparent to the applications that are hosted inside the virtual machines, and completely transparent to the end users as well. Right, so the third coming up, the third virtual resource which is presented to the virtual machine is virtual networking. Now, like any physical machine, as you know, when it comes to providing connectivity or communication mechanism between physical machines, we do have network interface cards, physical network interface cards. Those network interface cards, they are connected to the ports on physical switches. Okay, so switches, as you know, they provide connectivity between physical servers. Now, when it comes to virtual machines have got virtual NICs. They don't have physical NICs. So how do we provide communication between the virtual machines or between virtual machines and any physical resources or resources connected to the physical networks? We do have a virtual NIC. That virtual NIC is going to get plugged into a port of what is called a virtual switch. So virtual switches are what are created inside the hypervisor. Okay, then they are memory constructs, they're software constructs. So the virtual switch provides the same mechanism which physical switches provide to physical computers, right? So the virtual machines, the virtual NICs which belong to a virtual NIC which belongs to a particular virtual machine will plug into a virtual port in a virtual switch which is created on the ESXi server as well, right? Now, when it comes to networking, we do have enhanced networking as well. So this is, we are talking about virtual networking, which is built into ESXi host. Mal was talking about Nicira. We do have a product called NSX. NSX provides us enhanced networking and security functionality in the data center as well. We won't have enough time to go through that, but I just thought that I'll mention that. So we do have virtual switches which are created in the ESXi host, but you may have what is referred to as logical switches if you do have an NSX solution in place. Operating systems and the whole applications which are going to be hosted in those virtual machines where we have installed the operating system, they require hard drives to write the data and then subsequently read the data from there as well. Every virtual machine is configured with a virtual disk. Virtual disk, once again, which is presented to the virtual machine, is a file, right? Every aspect of the virtual machine is encapsulated in files. So when we do create a virtual machine and we choose the virtual machine, say for example, to have 100 gig hard drive, there is a 100 gig file which is created and attached to that virtual machine. So when we install the operating system gets installed in that virtual disk. That is that file. That file is going to be hosted on a physical storage, which is once again owned and managed by the ESXi server, right? So when the administrators create a virtual machine, they choose the number of vCPUs, the amount of memory, the number of NICs, the network interface cards we want to have, and the number of disks. Remember, you can have virtual machines with more than one disk as well. In the same way, physical servers can have multiple disks. So whatever the configured requirement for the virtual disk sizes, there will be a file which will be created on the storage subsystem which we choose to host or place the virtual machine on. Okay, when the virtual machine gets powered on, the virtual machine's guest OS is going to be read from that VMDK, from that virtual disk. It is known as VMDK file. The reason why I use the term VMDK, because if you do refer to any blogs or any documentations, there may be references to VMDK files. Okay, so the virtual disk which is presented to or which is configured up for a virtual machine is always going to have a suffix or an extension VMDK. So that's why they're typically referred to as virtual disks, as VMDK files, I mean. Virtual GPUs. Well, virtual machines, once again, can share specialized hardware devices like GPUs. Okay, so these are really for graphic intensive workloads. Okay, so you can dedicate a GPU device to a single VM, or if you do wish to, you can share the GPU devices with more than one virtual machine if you do require. Okay, so that is, once again, is going to depend on the type of resources, the type of application which you're running or hosting inside that virtual machine. Okay, we'll skip that. All right, let me just go straight there to save time. Virtualization and the software-defined data center, or SDDC as it is more commonly referred to as. Right, the types of virtualizations used in SDDC, the components of an SDDC, and the relationship between vSphere, the SDDC, and cloud computing. Okay, well, traditional data centers are typically on-prem, right? They are hardly defined, as we were talking about. They are going to be limited by the physical attributes of whatever your configuration of the ESXi server is. Now, if the demand for resources increases by the capacity of resources which are provided by the on-prem traditional data centers, we are going to be limited by the physical dimensions of that data center. Okay, do we have room for more servers to be added? Do we have room for more storage subsystems to be added, for that matter? Virtualization will transform a traditional data center into an SDDC, software-defined data center. So the data center is no longer limited by its physical dimensions, right? I need a new virtual machine, I can deploy it on the existing, on the available servers. If I need to provide networking, additional networking, I can go and add new virtual switches to provide connectivity to the virtual machines. Okay, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible without going into too much detail. Right, so there are different types of virtualization which are used in SDDC. Well, I talked about the hypervisors. So servers virtualization is what is going to virtualize our compute resources. The compute resources are our CPU and memory. Then we have network virtualization. As I did mention, the virtual switches which are created to provide connectivity between virtual machines and any physical resources for that matter. Storage virtualization is virtualizing the underlying storage infrastructure. That is where the virtual machine files are going to be hosted, and they're completely virtualized, abstracted from the virtual machine. Okay, desktop virtualization. In fact, desktop virtualization is more of a solution. Desktop virtualization gives us the ability to present the desktops to end users as virtual machines. Now, we do have a product called Horizon, which is our virtual desktop infrastructure, or a VDI solution. It is something which has been around for a long time. In fact, I still remember very early days, late 2007, 2008. That is when it was introduced. Basically, it gives the administrators the ability to have hundreds, if not thousands, of virtual machines hosting the desktop operating systems like Windows 10 and presented to the end users. Okay, so wherever we do have an endpoint which has got a compatible Horizon client or a Workspace ONE client, we do have the ability to access the applications and the desktops. That is of Windows 10 desktops and Windows 10 hosted applications. I'm using Windows 10 as an example. Could be Windows 10, could be Linux desktops for that matter. Okay, so those are the virtualization types that SDDC can consume. So the first three, server, network, and storage, every SDDC will have it. Desktop virtualization, that is, if that is the solution which is required by an organization. Right, so server utilization, okay, I've already mentioned this, so this is just recapping what we have mentioned earlier. vSphere is the product which provides us server virtualization. Now, I just want to mention here, this is also important. vSphere is made up of a number of components, right? So there's the ESXi server, which is our hypervisor. We do have the vCenter server, which provides a centralized management, and we do have the vSphere client, which is which is going to provide a GUI, a graphical user interface, to manage our data centers, which we will create in the vCenter server itself, right? So the physical server, as we did mention, they are going to share the underlying resources between the virtual machines. Right, a physical network is replicated in the software in the form of virtual switches. On virtual switches, we have virtual ports. A group of virtual ports is what is referred to as a virtual port group. So the virtual NICs, which are assigned to or configured for every virtual machine, they plug into those virtual ports. Here, for simplicity, we have already shown one NIC per VM. You can have multiple NICs per VM. Each NIC is going to connect to a port of its own. Now, as I did mention, we do have enhanced networking and security capabilities provided by our another software called NSX. Okay, so NSXT, in fact, NSX Data Center is going to be discontinued very soon. Right, storage virtualization. Well, we do have the storage subsystems which are going to be used to host the files the virtual machine is made up of. Now, when it comes to storage virtualization, the virtualized storage in an SDDC environment can be software controlled as well, and that solution is vSAN. In fact, we do have a hyper-converged infrastructure where vSAN, NSX, and vSphere are combined together to provide all of the virtualization platforms for our operating systems. And the application, of course, hosted in there. Right, as I did mention, Horizon, that is what is going to give us the ability to provide access to any desktops, okay, so hosting either Windows 10 or Linux for that matter, and applications which are hosted on the remote desktop services hosts. Okay, skip that. Right, so vSphere provides us the foundation of as software-defined data centers. So vSphere virtualizes the underlying resources, that is CPU storage and CPU storage, networking as well. But as I did mention, networking, more enhanced networking and security features what is going to be made available by NSX. But if you do not have NSX, you still have the networking resource, which is virtualized by vSphere. Right, it aggregates the resources. Okay, so you can have multiple ESXi servers configured in a cluster. The cluster is going to aggregate all of the resources which are presented by each one of the ESXi servers, which then can be shared between the virtual machines. Okay, and we do have the vSphere client that is the single pane of administration for managing our virtual machines and the workloads which are hosted in there as well. Right, guys? Well, I am pretty much on time. I think that's where 7:20, isn't? Okay, so this is how all these components tie up. Now, I just want to stop talking to the slides. In fact, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. Now, if you guys want to get a feel of what virtual machines are, if you guys want to get a feel of how to go and work in a vSphere environment, I will very strongly encourage you guys to use one of our tools. Now, let me just go back. Online resources. Right, we do have something called VMware Hands-on Labs. Some of you may already be aware of it. Now, this link, if you just Google VMware Hands-on Labs, it will point you, it will give you the link. This link, in fact, has changed. It is now labs.hol.vmware.com. But if you do Google it, it will point you to the correct location. Hands-on labs are available free of cost, completely free of cost, 24/7, every day of the year. We have got a hands-on lab for every product, and we have vSphere is just one of our many products, right? So if you want to get an introduction to vSphere, getting started with vSphere, real hands-on experience with the product, please go and subscribe to Hands-on Labs. All what you need is an email address. That email address will become your login credential. And once you're in there, you can then choose and start any one of the labs. Those labs typically have a time to live of 90 minutes, but you can extend them twice by 30 minutes each. But you do have indefinite access to those labs. Basically, what that means is if a lab expires after 90 minutes or after the 2 extensions which you have taken, well, exit the lab and you can start it all over again if you want to have a play around. Okay, so I'll very strongly encourage you guys to use that resource. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Asif. And fantastic to hear that described by you. And Hands-on Labs. So I was thinking about the same thing. So fantastic resource for the guys. The other thing from here is perhaps you could consider, can you guys see my screen, Kalani? I can see your face. Yep, okay. We've got VMware World coming up in October the 5th. And one of the things about VMware World is it's also free. So you can access that for hundreds of hours of content. But we also talked about VCTA. So if you register for VMware World for free, you can get 50% off VCTA certification exams. And then a lot of the content we've been talking about is available here on VMware Customer Connect Learning. But that's our content for today. So Gemma, let's go to anybody who asked a question. We have one question from Rachel, which was to Will, which said, do grads get involved with that kind of stuff? You still there, Will?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I don't remember what the stuff was pertaining to. So if
I have a feeling it was in relation to the volunteering. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel. Oh, sorry, or the social programs. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that sense, the grads are very much engaged in that side of things, and encouraged to create own initiatives and stuff like that, and perform. And I think it's sort of a big part of the grad program, I would say. Wouldn't you say, Kalani?
Yeah, and look, I mean, Will unfortunately has joined it in the midst of COVID and how, restrictions and no travel. But I know when in 2019, pre-pandemic, I know a couple of the grads went to Southeast Asia, and I think it was Cambodia actually, and they helped build houses and things like that. So it really can be as cool as you want it to be. as long as you want to. And I think to add to that, we actually give every employee 40 hours of what we call service learning every year. And so that's pretty much 5 days of full working time that we pay you to donate your time at any charity or volunteering. So I guess it's a really big part of what we believe in. Technology is obviously one piece, but giving back is another really important piece. So if you are interested in that stuff, we've got heaps of stories.
Nadia, you may like to mention the gift matching as well.
Yeah, that's another one. So every time you donate to a charity or non-for-profit organization, no matter you might be passionate about certain kinds of initiatives, VMware will match that dollar for dollar, cent for cent. So that's also a really nice thing, I think, as an employee to know that they really care about the people around you. Yeah.
Kalani, you've got a question from Hasith in the chat.
For the VMware graduate program, are there any alternative streams available, for example, business grads and consulting grads, or is the program mainly aimed at IT? Okay, good question. Will probably is a great testament to this. So I'll let Will share if you've got something as well, but absolutely not. I mean, today, obviously, a lot of our content was around technology. And so I think that's really good because that's a really big, we are a technology company, but, to support technology, there are so many other roles. And I think, in Will's case, he's in sales. So, you don't need to be technical. You can be in a business degree. We've had IT consultants, which are very technical roles, but people who have come in from very non-technical roles. So Michael, I love sharing Michael's story. Michael, one of our grads who started with us last year, he's coming from a law degree. He's worked with corporate law organizations, and now he's a technical consultant. So, don't feel like, you have to be technical if you're entering a tech company. There is a huge spectrum. And, there's a lot of places for people who come in with different backgrounds. So yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know if Will, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I'd also bring in the Sean Huntley story.
Yeah,
which is a good one as well. Which I think, was he a consultant?
He was a consultant. Yeah,
he came in as a consultant, and he was a pretty red hot coder from all reports, and sort of had, was playing around with his own stuff. And I think he submitted into one of the competitions we were running around security, around one of our kind of newer things. And yeah, I think he then got recognized pretty quickly and was able to kind of be promoted and actually switched streams, I think, into another thing. And now he's just a straight up developer for the security space, in the cybersecurity space. And I was talking to him like over lunch like a couple of weeks ago, and he's got like 10 patents to his name already or something. It's pretty insane. So there are many different streams, and there are many different avenues between those streams. And I think there's certainly a wealth of options there.
We've got some really successful grads, and I think to add, I think we couldn't let this event go without mentioning Will is also one of our very successful grads has only been at VMware for 7 months. But Mal, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 pitches that you've won, sales pitches you've won across the region, across Australia. So and that's with all these other experienced employees that Will won that twice already. So I think that's a testament to show that you really can achieve so much.
I think he was top in Australia, top in ANZ, top in APJ, and I think he even achieved recognition at the global level in some of those competitions. So
yeah, there you go. We've got a bit of a celebrity here. Out of curiosity, what is something you wish you knew before working at VMware? Will, would you probably better you answer?
Yeah, I saw that one come through from you, Gemma. I was just trying to think about it. I think something I wish I knew before VMware. It's a tough one. I think
I can answer that one.
You want to answer that, Mel?
I can answer that one if you like.
Go ahead.
Well, the way I think about it is that I wish I'd known about it earlier. So I wish I'd known what it was like at VMware earlier, and basically joined the company earlier in my career. That's what I wish for.
a very good answer.
That's a good one. I like it.
And then we've got another one. I think this is probably more SIF. Is it possible to cluster multiple servers and run one instance on ESXi?
Right. Well, Horizon is just Horizon is more. Horizon provides us the connection brokering functionality. Okay, so the virtual machines are still going to be hosted on the ESXi server. There is a component in Horizon which is called the connection server. That connection server becomes the connection broker, and that becomes a point of contact for any client who wants to access the desktop or the applications. Right, so that's what Horizon does.
All right, what about the time zone question, Asif? Can you see that one?
You can change time zones on ESXi servers. Okay. Who said that we can't?
And then we've got Arav above that. Arav is asking a question about clustering.
What is this? Is it possible to cluster? Absolutely, yes. Yeah, is it possible to cluster multiple servers? You can have multiple, in fact, typically in data centers, we will run clusters of ESXi servers. There are a couple of features like distributed resource scheduling, as I did mention, which has the ability of dynamically moving the virtual machines to balance the workloads between ESXi servers. That feature can only be enabled on cluster. We also have high availability, another feature which can only be enabled on the cluster. Basically, high availability protects you against a component failure. For example, if an ESXi server becomes unavailable for one reason or other, the server dies or gets disconnected from the network, the virtual machines which are hosted on that ESXi server, they automatically get restarted on surviving ESXi servers in a cluster. So yes, absolutely. In all SDDCs, you typically will have clusters. That is clusters of ESXi servers. And that cluster size can be fairly large. Our latest version supports as many as 96 ESXi hosts in a single cluster. And you can have a few hundred clusters per vCenter server for that matter.
Thanks, Asif. I can see one question. I know we're at time now, so I'll answer this one quickly around the interns. So look, I will say at VMware, a big focus for us from a recruitment perspective are graduates. So we don't hire too many. I'm actually about to post one for next year, which is an R&D role. But you know, they're not dozens every year. There's probably the one-off. So if you do have a look at our VMware careers page, you can actually set yourself alerts. Any role that we advertise, it's always up there. So, you know, keep an eye out there, and we do often post, you know, one or two at most, semester one or semester two. Awesome. Look, that's it. I think I know we're at time now, so I don't think we have anything to add further, but thank you all so much. And a special thank you to Mal, Asif, and Will as well. Hopefully you guys all gained something from today.
Yeah, and on behalf of everyone, we just want to say such a big thank you to Mal, Asif, Will, and Kalani from VMware for what was a really insightful seminar. I'm confident I speak for everyone when I say how interesting the concepts were. I know I specifically found that I like the part about the different types of virtualization in SDDC. And it was very interesting to look at all the different various parts. And you definitely showed us how even a student can get involved in things like this. So thank you so much for that. And before we end, if any of our participants found the areas of cloud computing and data center virtualization interesting tonight, then you might also be interested in the area of digital forensics. And lucky for you, we will be co-hosting a joint panel with CSEC FFS to introduce this area of IT to you all. It'll be on Tuesday, the 7th of September, a little under 2 weeks away, so be sure to look out for it on our Facebook page. On that note, it brings us to the end of our seminar tonight. Another huge thank you to our industry reps from VMware It was such a pleasure having you with us tonight, and we definitely got a lot out of it. And I hope you all have a great night. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Have
Thank
a good
you.
night.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you so much.